Okay. So definitely having an abbreviated meeting for so many reasons. I'm Peggy Flynn. I'm the co-president of the Democratic Women's Club, along with my good friend and colleague Carol Fuller. You know, on December 31st, I opened up my garage door and my garage was flooded. And I didn't know what to do, and I actually closed it because it was so overwhelming. And on the 1st of January, I opened it up again. And luckily I live really close to really good neighbors. And even though they were watching a football game, they all came out and helped me. You know, but what I realized was, what do you know? How do you know what to do in emergencies and disasters like that? Like, how do you know who to call for the resources for this thing? You and I both know that my incident was so minor compared to what other people suffered and dealt with throughout this county, not only in December and January, but on into February. So that's the reason we wanted to hear from you all, because you are three of the many organizations, but key organizations working in the community that on the disaster and the follow through. So we're going to start with Maria Elena, who's the executive director of the Community Action Board, CAB, and then Lynn Robinson, who's the Valley Churches. I always get it wrong. I always say
Valley Churches
United. I always want to say United Valley Churches, and a longtime public servant. And then Karen Delaney, who's our longtime executive director of the Volunteer Center. And their topics that they wanted was Maria Lynn is going to start with a grain of sand. Lynn is going to talk about the circle of gratitude. And Karen is going to talk about time to ask tough questions. So enough of me, but turn it over to you all. So Maria Lynn, you start.
Thank you. Good morning. Buenos dias, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I am really grateful for being asked to come and speak to you and to share a little bit about what's going on in my world, in our world, in South County world, in Pajaro Valley, and across the county. You know, Peggy, you framed that really well. December 31st, it feels like a blink ago, and yet feels like centuries ago, based on the needs and the work that we have done. I want to acknowledge Kristen Brown, who has been a longtime member of the Community Action Board, of our board of directors, and just want to express my gratitude. She leads in integrity, and she's got energy, and she knows exactly what we need to do, and just is always there for our agency. So thank you, Kristen, for your support.
We have a great role model in her.
And so I wanted just to share with you, and I know our time is short, and so I'm going to just jump into it, okay? I'm sure those of you know Community Action Board. You have been longtime partners with us. You know our agency. We've been around. This year is 57 years, turning 58 very soon, and we'll be 60 in a couple of years. So know that there's going to be a big pachanga, a big party on our 60th, and we expect you there. We exist to eliminate poverty and create social change. And the topic of my conversation today is granito de arena, which is in English means a little grain of sand. And that comes from a dicho that my mom taught me, saying, hi Ray, saying we all need to contribute, right? We all can contribute. We all can change the world if we know what our little grain of sand is. And so that is what my conversation is today, is the little grain of sand. And asking you to think about what your little grain of sand is, because together we make collective change and we change the world. So CAB has continued to offer 6 programs, 6 umbrella programs that center around employment services for adults and youth, immigration services for those who have a pathway to immigration, and since a few years back, where we had a very challenging federal administration and an administration that was very anti-immigrant. We created a new strategy of support and advocacy for immigrants without remedy, undocumented individuals and families who needed support and continue to need support. We offer community and youth development in the Davenport area. Those of you might know that we have a little center, a little resource center in Davenport, and we're really proud of the work. Last year, I think the number was 130,000 pounds of food was delivered to that community with the Davenport Resource Center. 130,000 pounds. That's a lot of food. And so we work with not only the senior community there, we work with the families the retired community there, but we also work with 250 farm worker families in the ranchos that surround the Davenport area. And as you imagine, we've been providing crisis response since the pandemic. Well, before the pandemic in emergency response in the past, but in the last 3 years, really have stepped into crisis response. Primarily, our role has been in economic relief. And so in the pandemic, in the fires, and in the floods, we have partnered with agencies like Community Bridges, yay, Catholic Charities, the Community Foundation of Santa Cruz County, the Community Foundation of Monterey County, to help provide economic relief to the communities that we serve and that have been most impacted. We serve about 13,000 people a year, and we have about 70, a little over 70 plus employees. And so we've grown pretty dramatically over the last few years. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the things that we offer, that we do every 2 years at the agency, which is we get involved in a process called the Community Action Plan, where we go out and try to work with those, talk to the community, talk to our neighbors, and begin to build the snapshot of poverty and what that looks like. And I want to share, this is preliminary data. We are in it right now. We are in the Community Action Plan process right now. And I want to share this data because this really speaks to the impacts on our community because of crisis. And just a little bit of data. We've been working and doing focus groups. We've done community surveys. We did a town hall in April. And our board of directors is committed to engaging in conversation with those folks who normally don't get involved in these kinds of processes. They don't have access to these kinds of surveys and assessment tools, blah, blah, blah. And so we go out and we have very intimate conversations, kitchen tabletop conversations. We do focus groups with those that we know normally don't get involved in those kinds of processes, or not because the systems can't adapt to it. And so what we have learned thus far, we have we're about at 400 surveying and having conversations combined to about 400 folks in this community. Again, this is all preliminary, and so a full report will be released later this year. But what I wanted to bring light to is the economic standing of the people that we are talking to. We learned that 20% of the folks that we engaged with reported earning $5,000 or less annual income last year. Thank you. That is the response. 10% reported less than $10,000 of annual income last year, and 26% reported less than $20,000. So we add those percentages up. 56% of our folks were reported earning less than $20,000 last year. That is complete and direct impact of the crisis that our community is dealing with. And I will say, this information is incredibly important because I don't think anyone else is having conversations with those community members yet. We're just not there yet. And it shows the impact in our questions and in our conversations. We wanted to find out, what poverty looks like and what services people have access to and don't have access to, and what is going on in their lives. And the normal things come up, right? High cost of living, lack of housing, lack of employment opportunities. Although people are working. People we're talking to are working. The issue is they're having to work 1, 2, or 3 jobs to make it in this community. The issue is that the wages of the folks that we're talking to it aren't enough to allow them to live a quality of life, the quality of life that they deserve in this community. And so more to come on that report, but I wanted to begin and frame our conversation with that. There is the crust of this crisis with our community. People are hurting economically. CAB's role has been in responding to the crisis since December 31st. In the first wave of the storm was we were out there with Community Bridges and the United Way and many other City of Watsonville, many other partner organizations to respond. And I am proud to say that we were part of the effort of helping make sandbags. So we did two things. We helped make sandbags and we helped knock on doors. We wanted to help get the information out and communicate to the senior community that was impacted in Watsonville. And we were part of the volunteers, and I always need to give voice. People who, some of the crew members that made the 80,000 pounds of sandbags were homeless community in Watsonville, were the day workers of Santa Cruz County, and were Spanish-speaking parents of our youth in our immigrant programs. And I want to give voice to that because that's the story that President Biden missed. He didn't get that piece. I love President Biden. I am a Democrat, yay, and he missed that story. Who was helping the community? And this group of folks, along with CBOs, we were all out there. Ray was out there in his poncho, Keisha was out, we were out there, okay? However, and the teams, because we don't do this alone. But these folks were volunteers who stepped up to help the community, the most vulnerable to help the most vulnerable. Absolutely an important story to share. And so fast forward to March 11th and the Pajaro River breach and that devastation. And I will say that I've been in nonprofits for 32 years and I've never seen the devastation that we are seeing in Pajaro and how that community has been impacted. I will tell you, and really quickly as I wrap up, that there are many, many needs that the families still hold and still have. And I know my colleagues will be speaking about that. But I want to talk about the 45 families who are still in the hotels. They need support. They are there for now. They continue to get there. They're there for 21 days and perhaps another 21 days. And case managers with Community Bridges and Catholic Charities are helping to provide strategies for them. However, there is a number one need: economic relief. Doesn't change. Number one need: economic relief, unrestricted funding for families who do not qualify for anything else. You can give to Community Foundation, you can give to CAB, you can give to Catholic Charities, you can give to Community Bridges, you can give to anybody, any CBO. We're all in it right now. We're all in it. And I want to give voice to a little service agency in Pajaro named Casa de la Cultura. If you've not heard of Casa de la Cultura, it is an agency run by Sister Rosa Dolores, a Notre Dame nun, and Sister Teresa. And they've been there for decades. And they're the only service agency that that live in Pajaro. And so I want to highlight their work. I want to highlight Sister's leadership. I want to ask if you or anybody have support. That is the direction that I encourage you to think about. Sister is in it. Sister is organized. Sister's also leading our long-term recovery group because she is the one who knows what has held the vision for Pajaro for decades. And we are coordinating and strategizing to help support bringing that vision to life. So with that, the last thing I'm going to say is in your little packets, there are some legislation that is important for you to know about. This is legislation that is being supported by the immigration networks. It is to support undocumented families, for health for all, food for all. The one legislation that is not listed on this is AB 513. That has been created by Assembly Member Freddie Rodriguez as a direct response to Pajaro and the needs that he saw here. And that AB 513 is to help provide economic relief to undocumented families and also reimburse the CBOs who have invested, I think collectively, millions with no promise of reimbursement. To help support the community. AB 513. That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, it's wonderful for those of us that are able to be here together, just between the pandemic and then the work that we do. We haven't had an opportunity to be together and see each other. And we are in these roles that make you pivot on so many different levels. So I will talk about the most recent storms, but it's just, it's really wonderful to be together. Because we don't really, you're doing this work and it's incredible work. And that's why I called mine the Circle of Gratitude, my little talk. Because I've been in this role now for 8 years. Valley Churches United was born of the storms of 1982. We are living in the watershed of the county there. If you watch the weather reports and everything else, they usually list Ben Lomond as the highest rainfall of the day, of the week, of the month. And I can attest to that on so many levels. I tell people I sleep in Santa Cruz, but I live in Ben Lomond. And, many of you know, I mean, I've had this incredible, the trajectory of my journey in life. It's been amazing. The job I've had the longest has been as a professional gardener. This year, after 49 years, I'll wrap that up.
Wow.
And then I'll just kind of be in my garden sometimes. But I always thought that was my job of gratitude. Like, what gets better than being a gardener, right? Maybe a singer-songwriter in my mind. But then I ended up with the amazing opportunity just from just being a citizen in my community and wanting to be involved in what's wrong and how can you fix it. Not knowing this is the role I would step into, but I was on the city council in Santa Cruz for 8 years. The last year being the mayor, that was in 2014. So then I turned out and ended up with this incredible opportunity. Someone had reached out to me when there was an opportunity for leadership role at Valley Churches United, and that was at the end of 2015, if I recall now, because I've been there 8 years. And when you end up joining a legacy nonprofit like Valley Churches that has been around now, this is our 41st year, so we have a few years behind you. But still, I think it's amazing because we're just literally community, the donorship of how we exist is literally through the community. We have no direct government funding whatsoever. And that's kind of the legacy of Annette Markham. People used to call her the Mother Teresa of the Valley. And she would, if there was a drop of rain, she was there. I've kind of helped change the culture a little bit because you don't have to live there all the time. However, we've always been considered a disaster center, but we are first and foremost a year-round food pantry. Serving a population and a portion of Santa Cruz County that's always been underserved. Mainly the San Lorenzo Valley, but we also go through all of Scotts Valley area and up into the Bonnie Doon area. And it's been a place historically that people have gone to live in some of these community areas because it was less expensive to live. You could kind of tuck yourself away and be self-sufficient and take care of yourself until things happened and you can't take care of yourself. So for instance, what created us was the incredible storms and tragedies of 1982, where in our area up in the valley, lives were lost. We literally own our building. We're one of those fortunate nonprofits that have control of that space. It's on Love Creek and we're at Highway 9. Love Creek literally is behind us, but Love Creek Road and the mountainside where the slides happened and families there were buried is part of our legacy. And so we never forget our roots of how a community, especially when you get isolated, that's another experience I think we can all share. We are working with populations of people that, even though they're our first responders and our community is amazing at doing first responding, however, there's times when you are on your own, and we all know that there are those situations. The storms of 82 was a perfect example. That's how our name came about, Valley Churches United. There, we are not a church, and I have to explain that often, but it's because so many people in the valley were coming from their place of working from their churches and coming together to help each other because they were stranded, they were isolated, you couldn't get to the roads. When I talk about our storms right now that we just went through, I'll talk a little bit about that. So if you fast forward, then we've been through, and Valley Churches is really a receptacle of people's generosity. So going back to that circle of gratitude, they know that when they are giving to Valley Churches, it's going directly back into the community of need right then and right there. So I'm thinking of all the different, there was an earthquake, 1989 earthquake. I think there's about $500,000 that came in and went out for support for people that are affected right in, particularly where most of the damage was in that area. Because every part of our county, I love that we're really representing the different parts of our county right now, the three of us. You have very unique circumstances. So, I'm thinking back, then there were some more floods in 95. I'm thinking back on the things that I wasn't there at Valley Churches, but I've been in our county. I've been in the county since 1974 or something like all of our natural disasters that we have. We're resilient. We are a resilient community, but it takes a village, and it takes this sense of coming together in these times of need to get us back to even kind of where we were. It's not like you're even getting yourself ahead. You're just trying to triage and get yourself back to how you were functioning before that disaster. For us, it's hard not to talk about, because I mean, you think about the last 3 years, the CZU fires was predominantly in our service area of San Lorenzo Valley, Scotts Valley, Bonnie Doon. I asked my board, we don't normally also include all of the Davenport area. I lived some of my most amazing years of my life up in Swanton. So when you talk about these areas that just got annihilated, like Pajaro just did.
Yeah.
You didn't even have a chance to talk about how many displaced, how many homes were lost. For us in our service area, there were so many homes that were absolutely lost, whether it was a homeowner, well, there was a homeowner, but also for us, so many were renters. So many of those homes were rentals. And those were already clients of ours that were in need of food security, which is our main purpose. But we also step up in the times of disaster. So for CZU fire support, we had over $500,000, similar to the earthquake, come in for support. We've spent already to date over $600,000 in support for CZU. Before this meeting, I was actually at Home Depot with a client helping make purchase of all the, not some tools that he still needed because they lost everything. I mean, we don't have to describe it. People know when you go through those kind of things, the floods, they lost everything. The fires lost everything. So, and then you couple that with the COVID experiences for so many people that were already fragile, less work hours, or their children were home for school, so they couldn't be at work. There's just so many reasons why COVID, on top of having the fire experience for our clients, made such a fragile living experience. And we were just a piece of the puzzle of helping people. And really our job and the mission that the board has really focused on is that we help people be self-sufficient, give them hope, help them be resilient. We can't solve all their problems, but we can be a big piece to how they can sustain themselves. So we are always reminding our clients, sometimes we don't see them for a while, and they'll just say, well, we're okay, someone else needs it more than us. But we remind them that in coming by in our cycle of coming every 2 weeks for food support, and it's substantial, it's really substantial, and especially now with inflation. If you fast forward to now, the donations that we even get in, say we have drivers that pick up at our local stores and stuff. So on top of, we're a member of Second Harvest Food Bank, so we get food from there, and then we also purchase food, but just daily donated food. Say it's bread, milk, eggs, and maybe we already have cheese from a different source or something, but just those 4 items alone, separate from our huge heavy bag of non-perishable food, separate from even the wonderful food we'll get from donations from our local farmers markets. You're talking just the bread, the milk, the eggs, that's already $20 right there. And we remind our folks that, and they're hard to get sometimes. I mean, with inflation right now and the cost of things, we're providing food that's not even already easy to get. We remind them that extends their money so that they can pay that PG&E bill, so that they could pay the propane bill, or or put it towards your rent. Come by and get that support from us. So, and we still consider that we're helping them be self-sufficient. It extends their money. So we have to kind of remind them, like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay, we'll be back. We'll come. We're not going to skip a visit, because that just is one of the things that helps people get by and stretch their money, because inflation right now, that's the other thing we're not really talking about, but that's been hugely impactful for our clientele and has brought a lot of new clients our way. So let's just say the last 3 years, we've got COVID was first. Okay, so that was March of 2020, CZU fire, August of 2020. Then inflation this past year has been off the hook. For all of us that can manage our finances are experiencing it. Like, are you kidding me? You know, you open up a bill or you just went to pay for something you'd usually pay at the grocery store and you saw it double in price. Yeah, I can give you a couple examples that I'm hearing about things just for people that are managing their money. We have a lot of new clients that said, you know, I'm usually a donor, and we find a way to share with them. We kind of almost stop them like, well, we're here to help you, so that they don't feel like they're asking for some help, because I think it's so hard for folks that know that they usually can get by and right now they can't. So we always try to have that, again, circle of gratitude, a way to help bring them in and show them that we're here to help support them in their time of need. They won't always need it, but we want to make it as dignified as it can be, because sometimes it's just really hard for folks to ask, and that's why the community expects us to be helping like that, and we do it with open arms. So fast forward to these storms. It's now May, and I think I'm just now settling down to realizing, okay, we're done, right? For now, when all of you think about the cycle of those storms, you have those dates in your head.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was driving into work. I mean, when I think about, I get to leave the ocean area and go into the redwoods every day. Talk about blessings and gratitude. However, there were days where I was like, I know I shouldn't be driving into this. I'm going up into where it's the worst, but I wouldn't not be there. I was kind of asked a couple times, I go, no, it's my job and it's where I want to be, because it's going to be worse for someone else. So I'll give a couple experiences, but generally speaking, we had so much damage that never got recorded, that wasn't being described, because it just was happening everywhere. I'll just pass this around. I won't be able to show it on Zoom, but it's just one example. We just took food to this woman again yesterday. She can't get anywhere. You'll see why. The tiny little cabin, but that's so typical of stories that we had from clients of trees in smash their cars, smash their houses. The last round of storms was a night that we couldn't even leave. We couldn't even get out. If anyone knew, but most people didn't, up in the San Lorenzo Valley, there was one day you couldn't get in and you couldn't get out. And we, for the first year ever, have a automated generator system now. So we were a beacon of light because it was running. And there was a woman that came, she just was shell-shocked. Found our doors. It was before dark though, so we had her there all afternoon, just calming her down. The tree through her rental, and we've talked with her since. She wrote a letter because she realized she just having a place to go and be able to get calmed down from what you just experienced was just a blessing, a bit tiny piece of that gratitude. It just kept rolling along hour by hour. Of people kind of coming our way because there was nowhere else. You couldn't get in or out of the valley, and we literally are at a location which is the huge slide that happened in San Lorenzo Valley. Our roadway was the place where everyone had to turn. So we will continue to help. We've done probably about, I don't know, maybe 60,000 of support for just this storm, and it's still happening. But that's really the essence of who we are and what we do. So I think we're just one more part of that village of support for everyone. And I appreciate the time that we could come and share with the community that Valley Churches is 41 years strong and will continue on. We don't know what the next disaster will be, but we'll be there.
Hi, I'm Karen. My job for the last 35 plus years, yeah, I know it's crazy, is as director of the volunteer center. And I realized I chose to say I'm gonna ask some tough questions and use my advocacy voice. So I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to really talk a lot about the volunteer center, because I've also been a lifelong Democrat and a campaign junkie and a political activist my whole life. So I want to tell you enough about the Volunteer Center work so you can understand my on the ground knowledge and how I'm informing this. But when I'm asking some tough questions, it's in a loving reform voice within the family, because I really know who we are and what we're trying to do. And change happens when we also, and I think this is a particular place for the Democratic Women's Club, because we all know the people, it's not, sometimes it's hard for the people on the front line, and the point of the spear is to be the pushers. But the people who raise the money, the people who stuff the envelopes, the people who get people elected, we have to use our voices for change. And we have to ask hard questions and tell hard truths. So the Volunteer Center, one of our many roles is going back all the way to the storms of '82, as long as I've been there, is to have two big roles in disasters. One role is whoever, public partners, EOS, or any of our wonderful partners needs volunteers, we send them, because we have this machine for recruiting volunteers. In the CZU fires, we registered and dispatched 8,000 volunteers, 2,000 each in the last two storms. The other thing we do is when there's an on-the-ground need that there is no local partner for, and it's something we feel volunteers can do safely, which is most often physical labor cleanup, we take the lead on that. So we are the muck out crews. We had, in addition to all that other stuff, we had 106 houses that we literally, and before I get to the tough questions, I have to say my gratitude. If you have never been out in the field and seen strangers show up and suit up in Tyveks and shovel mud for strangers, toxic, stinky mud for strangers for 6-hour shifts, hundreds of people did that. So I got the gratitude. This is a generous community. And in the case of Pacaro, it was like people climbed under houses and crouched with a trowel and little buckets tied together by rope and found in full Tyvek suits and pulled them out by rope underneath 85 houses and mobile homes, because that's where the toxic mud was. So yes, this is an amazing community. And Volunteer Center website, scvolunteercenter.org. We have all the current needs. So it's a really interesting perspective, but I want to use that to inform really some deep questions and policy changes that I'd like everybody to think about and use their voice. And the first is, and I think both these ladies touched on it, I'm sure Ray would say the same thing. Thanks to Democrats, there is a movement being led by California as we have more and more disasters, one after the other, like clockwork. People are realizing that the model of the disaster people who fly in from everywhere doesn't work. It's irretrievably broken because low-income people are always disproportionately affected by disasters. Not that everybody doesn't experience them, but the people who have networks and assets and resources recover quicker because they have networks and the people who always lose. So for the last 5 years, California and our county have really been going all in on using networks on the ground. So it's the Volunteer Center during the CZU fires and all these disasters that in the first 2 weeks schedules the Volunteer Center in the county, schedules the shelter workers, not Red Cross. Red Cross comes in later. The fascinating thing about this move, which is a great move, is that, and Monterey County, for example, doesn't do that. So one of the things we had to do in Monterey County, because they did use their precious money not to fund these great organizations that were on the ground, they brought in a disaster specialty firm from Northern California, and we had to recruit 20 extra volunteers every day because they showed up being paid by the county of Monterey with 0 Spanish speakers. 0 Spanish speakers, right? On our watch, ladies and gentlemen. Like, why is that okay? Why is there not accountability for how our public dollars are spent? Why is it, and speaking of accountability for how our public dollars are spent, because Democrats have no lack of vision or will or a justice driven agendas, but we are not good with following the money. That's my opinion after 40 years of activism. We are not good with following. All these nonprofits that have stepped up are the reason we step up is we have ongoing relationships. In the 5 years prior to and including the disasters of the 5 local jurisdictions that fund nonprofits, how many of them gave a single cost of living increase to any of us? City of Scotts Valley cut funding for 3 years, totally. City of Capitola suspended funding for a year. If the safety net, Santa Cruz County used to be in the top 5 for percentage of their budget they spent on nonprofit contractors. In 2018, we'd slipped to 20th place. On our watch, ladies and gentlemen, the safety net has fallen as a funding priority. So that's something we can change. All you have to do is everyone whose campaign you work for, everyone who comes for endorsement, you just have to say this. Do you commit every year to giving your nonprofit contractors the same cost of living increase you're giving your own staff? It's a yes or no question. Not a lot of blah, blah, blah needed. There will be a lot of blah, blah, blah. But is that acceptable to us? Because you're hearing how we are afraid to the point where it's crazy. It is crazy what's happening. Half of our staff qualify for food stamps. Almost 2/3 of them work a second job because we haven't been, our best partners don't give us cost of living increases to pay them. That's in the bluest county in the bluest state in this country. So equity starts with what's in our hearts and our policy platform. You want to see what really is happening with equity? Look at the last 5 years of budget decisions. We have to have budget accountability. There's a package right now, and I'll send it out to everyone, of 7 bills that 4 of them have, all 7 of them have passed committees, 4 of them are out of appropriation, called the Nonprofit Equity in Funding Acts. 3 of the versions of 3 of the bills passed last year, both houses, and Newsom vetoed them. So we need to stand up for, if we expect grassroots organizations to answer the call when there's needs, and we always do, we have to make sure that their workers are paid fairly, right? That's who we are. We're the party of safety net, and we're the party of working people. And that's where our values are. If we're falling down on the money piece, we have to ask those tough questions. We have to demand accountability. So the other thing I want to talk about, and I'm going to call it the tale of 2 cities, because living through this, if there's anyone in the world who doesn't understand what institutional racism is, you could not have designed a better model. 2 coastal cities with a population of less than 10,000 people, 15 miles from each other, have floods 40 days apart. 1 coastal city, both their businesses are destroyed. 1 coastal city has 10 people evacuated beyond 1 day and out of their housing. The other coastal city has half their population evacuated and still in shelters or out of their homes 6 weeks later. 1 coastal city gets an emergency declaration as a major disaster within 4 days, has 2 visits from the governor, is on the front page of the New York Times, and has the president visit. The other coastal city, 29 days in, the statutory limit, is back-ended for a FEMA declaration, not as a major disaster, but as a declaration that there's these random communities in 5 counties who have had floods and they qualify together. Has the governor been there or any cabinet level official? No. And this happened in the bluest counties, in the bluest state, in the richest state, in one of the richest nations on earth. What is the difference? What is the difference? I mean, we all know, right? One's a wealthy white community, one's a wealthy brown community. One's a poor brown community. We know that, right? And that is the deficit. And here's what we know, because this isn't happening in a red state where they're just doubling down on the racism. This is happening in a community where we work hard for equity, where we are trying, right? And that's the difference. Nobody likes this happening. Nobody wants this happening, but we have to acknowledge since it's still happening, why is it happening? And what can we do to stop it? Why isn't it front page news that people just got out of the shelter last weekend on temporary housing with literally nothing? When I leave here, I'm going to our new donation warehouse because what Sister Rosa said people need is diapers, shampoo, toilet paper, feminine hygiene products, and soap and underwear for 200 people. FEMA's here. Why are we stopping to collect toothbrushes for hundreds of people at this point? But that's what we got to do, right? So in terms, I'm not just saying this to bum people out, but I think what happens is when we fall short of our lofty goals, the human tendency is to look away, right? So let's not do that. And then when it happens on our watch, we don't want to criticize our own. That's why Newsom killed those bills. I'm running for re-election, and it's not the time to hash this out. Makes it look like I don't care about these folks. Well, if you care about them, you have to say things that are uncomfortable. You have to say things that make you feel bad, right? That's what I'm asking all of us to do. So there's a couple things. Why is this happening? So here's an interesting structural fix. We don't need to talk about racism because we're not racist, we don't feel bad. But we do have to talk about what are the structural things causing this. Who can tell me how FEMA decides whether or not something's a major disaster? Do you think it's how many people are displaced? Who thinks that's the measure? Raise your hand. Who thinks, is it the size of the event? This is the biggest flood in 100 years. Do you think it's the number of people or the need? No, it is the per capita property value of damage in the disaster area. Valuable property, that's written in the language. Destroy valuable property, you get the president. Destroy people's lives, every single thing they own. You get a fund drive by a nonprofit that's exhausted. Now we need to take both houses of Congress back and retain the presidency to change FEMA, but we don't need to let that happen with California dollars, right? And we need to get our federal folks on. Why do levee floods always burst in low income areas? It's the same reason, because per capita property value in the risk area for floods, for any infrastructure, every place, this needs to be in the Democratic agenda, every place where aid is triggered by property value, that is racist. That is why we still have poverty. And if we don't say it out loud, we're not going to root those out and change them, are we? That's why a kid in Scotts Valley, their teacher gets paid more than a kid in Pajaro District, because we fund schools that way too, don't we? How is that in line with who we are? That is why we still have racism. That is why we still have economic inequity, because we need to be better about looking at all those old laws that determine our future. We control this state, fix those damn laws. And don't take excuses about why it's hard. Some people will lose, yeah. Who can tell me who will lose when we do that? People in those rich towns who get a disproportionate. This is the definition of white privilege. Nobody asked for that, but you get it. And you don't even notice it till someone comes to fix it, and then you're taking away my stuff, right? I have to wait longer for my bridges to fix. My kids get less in school. So if we are serious about being the party of equity and the party of ending racism, we have to figure out how to have these discussions and to tell the truth. And when people say, well, you're just all woke, show them a picture, show them the headlines of Pajaro and Capitola and say, I'm sorry, I thought this explained that. How about you explain this? If that's not what's happening here, what the hell is, right? What the hell is? Because none of us want this to happen, but it is until we figure out the money and figure out a way to have these conversations and change them. So any one of us can start asking. I've never been to a forum that doesn't have someone who's in this club at the forum. What are you going to do to end property value-based aid? What are you going to do to make sure that mixed status in disaster, mixed status families and families who drive the economic engine don't get kicked to the gate and go to work in the same pair of flip-flops with no underwear, because that's what's happening. Literally no flip-flops. The county of Monterey, when it was time to do the first muck out and our volunteers were there in full Tyvek suits, drove people from the shelter and dropped them off and gave them exactly two things: a bottle of water and an English and Spanish flyer that said, if you want us, when you bring everything you own to the curb, if you want it to be taken away for free, here's the 7 piles you need to sort it into, or you have to pay to take it away yourself. So you had people coming in the only clothes they owned in flip-flops, like seriously talking about unexplained disaster. We went out and had to keep replacing all of our boots and all of our gloves and all of our Tyvek suits. Thank you, babe. Because we had to just keep giving them to the residents who got nothing from the county of Monterey. So we can do better, right? We can do better. Our generation can fix this forever by looking at these boring structural budget things and politely behind scenes holding people accountable. So that is and I have faith in us. I'm a faithful, hopeful person. Hope. I know how committed Democratic Women's Club and the Progressive Democrats are. We can do this. Did I say something?
Excuse me, not yet. Thank you to our 3 speakers for coming. Can you stay a little bit longer for some questions? But before, I'd like to acknowledge Ray Cancino, Executive Director. And Ray, is there anything you'd like to chip in and talk about the work of your agency? Because I know it's all been a lot of collaboration, and if you would, could you scoot over? Would you mind?
Take my spot.
Thanks, Linda, thanks, Ray.
Yeah. I think the team here covered pretty much the disaster pretty well. I think the only major things I think I would add to that is that in disaster, it's chaos. I mean, literally, in this last disaster, the county of Santa Cruz set up the initial shelter. And even when they were still just putting out cots, it was then transferred to Monterey County in the middle of the night, essentially, with 3 staff people from the county, dozens of community members, and nothing else. Like no coordination about how food was going to get there in the morning. no cleaning, no toothbrushes, no underwear, no, like all these things that, people in the middle of the night were woken up. I mean, just imagine yourself being woken up at midnight. Yeah, and you knew that the storm might be coming, but you had already been warned a couple times, so, you might have not left. And you were rushed out, and when you go out, the water's already 3 to 4 feet high, right? You don't have that bag, you might have not planned for it. And so you get rushed into this fairgrounds, not knowing how long your stay was, right? People were in a state of shock. They didn't have their basic needs were being met at that moment in time. And community members know that, so they respond. And so you get then 30, 40, 50 volunteers all rushing in with donations, with things, everything's just being poured in. And I think that part of this is a planning exercise in the sense of a lack of how to best use community's goodwill to be most impactful during the times of crisis and emergency. And our team had to play a coordinating role to try to organize that as best as we could and triage it as best as we could. While at the same time, putting equity forward, not just as a buzzword or as a thing we throw out there, but really thinking about using objective measures of an individual's needs. So assessing people right away and doing an assessment of, did you lose your whole house, or did you just lose your car? Did you just get stuff in your garage? How many people do you have? Are you on fixed incomes? How much money are you making? All those questions to determine who we're going to be serving first versus not just who knocks on the door first, right? And I think that's a very unique role that we've played, and I don't see that happening across communities. I haven't seen it done before. But I think it's vital because it's not like we have infinite amount of dollars to help everyone, right? That's not to minimize someone's experience that had to be evacuated for several days and locked out of their house, but maybe they came home and everything was intact. There's many homes like that. But there's many other individuals that came home and lost everything, just like everyone says here. I'll just put two kind of examples, right? Because we did see the visual devastation. I say that visual devastation cautiously, not to minimize it, but just to put context to it. We had more homes actually damaged in Santa Cruz County in the last March storms in terms of major disaster. So trees falling and destroying, complete destruction of homes in Santa Cruz County than we did in Pajaro. But that's not the narrative we see. That's not the reality we see, right? But we don't use news stories as a way to make determinations. We use data. So I think it's important for us to use data in a way that actually is targeting where the resource to rebuild is most needed and how we are doing that equitably and in a way that's actually focused on recovery as best as possible. So our team with Catholic Charities holds a contract for the state to do what they call disaster case management, which is basically after immediate response to really do further assessment of families and individuals that have access all the social service agencies and FEMA and or are still working with FEMA to determine, one, can they rebuild? How much money did they receive and what's the gap? And so our team will be doing that and working through that. Our team has also been responsible with coordination of other nonprofits because not one organization can take on an emergency, like everyone says here. But what we need to do is we need to know what freeways and what lanes each one should stay in, right? And so sometimes that's not clear. But over time, we've now had to do this over time. We all know what nonprofits are good at doing what, right? I should not be doing food distribution, right? No one here should be, right? That's Second Harvest's lane, and making sure that they're clear about, all right, but who are my partner agencies that are going to step up to do the distribution, and whatever area is impacted needs to be clear. And so I think there's a learning opportunity in terms of both Monterey and Santa Cruz County to have not just nonprofits be reactive to the disaster, but to be integrated into the disaster response. So that's having a seat at the table in their OE3 meetings and being a part of that discussion, and then having some leadership in those discussions to actually help triage the nonprofit response in a way that's going to be more coordinated instead of what ends up sometimes happening is who's doing what, and or separate groups kind of standing up the same program or service. And being then slower to respond than we need to be. I also think that in terms of the structural conversation, which I really appreciate Karen just identifying, is weather doesn't care where you were born. Weather cares if you reside in the current environment or not. And I think that as a California, but I think as our community, we need to really understand, and this is something thanks to visits with legislators that did come to Pajaro, really communicate that it doesn't matter your citizenship status, you're still impacted by disaster. And in this instance, you're impacted by disaster as a result of failed infrastructure. So the federal government needs some accountability and some responsibility to ensure that they take care of those that were negatively impacted as a result. And so I think it's pushing for a clear understanding that it needs to take care of all of its citizens, regardless of where it was born. And that's something we haven't necessarily done so. And that means inclusion of people that are not only mixed status families, but we're talking, full undocumented families, and addressing those needs in terms of doing that. Individuals that we know in our community, and that's one of the criteria, is that they're they're not eligible unless they're mixed status family, eligible for some programs and services through FEMA. They might be eligible for SBA, but these are all loans. They're not cash grants. They're not support. And even if you, on best of circumstances, you're a citizen, you get FEMA, you do all that, there is still a huge gap between what you lost and what you will recover, right? The best analogy I've presented to folks around this disaster is that the federal government acts like an insurance company. If you've ever had to file an insurance claim, their job is to deny you. Your insurance company is not to give you a full reimbursement of your loss. It's to minimize their contribution to you and maintain solvency of the program, which it is they're insuring as a group. And that's the same case as the federal government in these instances and more. And so philanthropic dollars, local community dollars are critical to kind of bridge the gap. But it won't solve for everyone, and it won't help everyone, and it shouldn't. And that's a harsh reality. But what is the best that you can do in those circumstances is to provide financial resources to the person most impacted, the person most in need, and the person most devastated by the disaster, not the first person that comes to the door. And that, unfortunately, is how most disaster financial response happens, is that we get these, what I call now, these disaster hawks, large national organizations that this is what they do. They just fly in with their suits and they're all coordinated, and they want to hand out $25 checks, but they only have 50 checks. And so it's the first people that sign in and get in line, while you have a need of 1,000 people. So what does that do? That causes anxiety, frustration, anger, because the 970 other people didn't get served, right? Which doesn't serve us well. It also doesn't even take into account that the first person in line, was only evacuated, and the 99th person in line lost their whole house. And so there needs to be a real control of those types of responses to be more empathetic, more caring, and more responsible with the financial resources we have as well. So, we've taken that job very seriously and used objective data, which is using a destruction map, which is the CAL FIRE destruction map, to make those determinations and decisions. At this point in time, we're now in phase 2 of our financial relief. We've provided over $1 million since the beginning of January storms across both counties. And we've started a long-term recovery group in Santa Cruz County to continue to provide resources for those families that might be referred from Valley Churches to us or already known as a part of it. And so, we'll continue to do that and provide that level 2 support in Pajaro, which means individuals and households in red and orange disaster communities will receive anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000, depending on their household size. And then we're also adding on the Monterey County's new program that they did kind of a sliding scale based on households of $450 to $750 on top of that. And so we just look forward to kind of continuing to serve that. But I think for the questions for us in this group and for future elected individuals is one, how are you going to sustain nonprofits to actually have the staff to respond to these disasters? How are you maintaining services that are most needed in times of disasters to be able to respond when your community needs it? And then how do we better coordinate within counties and local governments to partner with nonprofits so they're not just spinning wheels across both communities and actually working together to solve an issue? And I think that there's a work group starting in the city of Watsonville after the January 1st storms through City Manager Renee's office to help identify what worked well and how did that work. Because I think that our work as partner organizations to provide not only structure support in those help save lives and help minimize damage, but it also was I think a real eye-opening about how do we set up those lanes and which partner agencies are willing to step in what disaster. Because even when I tell my team now that I might die tomorrow and the next CEO might not want to jump in. And so this system that you set up has to be flexible enough that whatever organization has capacity, willingness, and is able to respond can jump in, but it shouldn't just be up to one of these organizations at this point in time, because that's always changing depending on the disaster. We just need a system that will provide leadership, and then that leadership is respected and leaned on depending on response to the disaster. So it's removing our egos in our organization and really setting up a structure that is responsive to the community need and to the willingness of the nonprofit's response. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Rick.
Peggy, if I can just add one layer
Of course,
to
please.
when you talk to the electeds.
Yeah.
The need isn't just in Spanish anymore.
Yeah.
The need is in indigenous languages. The need is in Mixteco and Triqui and Zapoteco. And that is an important language justice piece that we need to add to the systems. Because that's what one of CAB's role is, to be able to provide support to the Mixteco speaking community. And we're seeing an elevation of people being able to respond to other agencies, but we need to weave it in. We need to weave it into the legislation.
Thank you. Before we take a few questions, I want to just say that both of you mentioned legislation and needs that are still ongoing. We will post those on the Democratic Women's Club. And if there's anything else, that you want to send to me, send me, and Carol and I will get it on. Okay. So Seal, I think you had your hand up around
I
there for a
did.
question.
And it was the timeliness of this discussion, because I just read it every day on my cell phone. I get these notices about the magnitudes of earthquakes we're feeling around here right now, and that the projections of what's coming to us in California. And those who were mobilized after the 89 one mostly retired. So there isn't that.
Right, yeah.
Those of you who were somewhat involved, but it's a wonderful discussion and a precursor of what should be happening here. And I'm sorry that press isn't here, but what I did want to mention to all of you, I'm a member of the Friday Rotary, and I just feel that a presentation like happened here today would be good to be making to the Rotary clubs around the county.
Yeah. Thanks, Seal. I want to ask, do you need to go?
I do.
Are
I'm
there
so
any
sorry.
questions specifically for Maria Elena? Because I know she has to run off
I just
to
had a quick question, maybe it's not quick. So programs and funding, we know that's going on, we know the legislation, advocacy needs, the power structures, like how can we help the nonprofits? Or maybe they're created, and I'm not as a, but where is the power structures that keep this front and center, and are nonprofits able to unite in a way? I know Silicon Valley nonprofits does have a pretty substantial policy group as part of their efforts, and I've often thought, I'm not sure that Santa Cruz County quite has it at that level yet. Just a quick question, and maybe that's a long
I can-
question. You can answer it.
for it.
Great,
Yeah.
go.
You're good.
The nonprofit policy
Thanks a lot.
advocacy organization that we had for years, that Maria Elena's CAB,
Uh-huh.
Community Bridges, us, I think Human Care Alliance. Honestly, the last 5 years have worn us down.
Understood.
Prior to COVID, we had
Fair enough.
40 members. I
Understood.
think, like So if you're interested, I think Human Care Alliance, HCA.org. But we really need, and this is one of the things when you're undercapitalized and overcall, you just
I
really
understand.
can't support those, you can't, when you're too good at advocating for too many years, you cost people money. And so
Right.
there's been erosion in support for these sorts of nonprofit advocacy organizations, because it's like, you guys just need to, you can't keep asking for more money every year, is what we were told in quiet, closed door advocacy by Democrats.
Yeah.
And
I guess what I was thinking more about though is the intersection between the law and policy and.
so California Association for Nonprofits, so the Human Care Alliance, we do have an advocacy group and we
Okay,
would love support.
Yeah.
okay.
And I'll just add that, you know, we've had,
So that you're in town.
oh, camera.
No, the three of us stay.
No, then no, no, I am, I can't.
You've done that.
I mean, we've also had an erosion, I think, the democratic process of being able to go to city council
Right,
and to
understand.
voice,
Exactly.
you know, concerns. There's been, you know,
I think so.
I mean, there's tricks to the trade, right? You limit people's speaking time, right? So I get 3 minutes,
I
but
understand.
council or staff get a 90-minute presentation,
Right,
you know? So there's just already dynamics and realities, right? Or you get chastised for bringing clients in,
right. Which is crazy.
which is, you know, kind of the latest thing, right? And or you have revisionist history of prior services and programming. And I think that from a fundamental thing, I think people are worn out. They got tired of losing these small victories. I mean, over time, you wear people out.
Right.
And I think a lot of, and we also had a generational shift in, I think, the nonprofit execs. I mean, we've lost a lot of our key figures in large service organizations over the last 5 years with new leadership. And to be frank, the revolutionary, you know, like organize, build capacity isn't done in that way. It's right now fragmented, and it's, you get a contract.
Yeah.
And the non-spoken outcome of that is, well, I don't need to organize for others, right? But that doesn't lift all boats. That doesn't lift the sector. That doesn't do much good for the overall investment. I think that the biggest advocacy that we can ask is just add more dollars to the pot. I frankly don't care who gets it. I just think that the human needs are more prevalent. There's more of them, and they're more costly. And so we need more dollars from every jurisdiction to be coordinated to be investing into social service needs. And we should be investing more in people and more in helping people than policing people. But that's not the reality.
Well, and as a percentage of every jurisdiction's budget, if you look compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and 20 years ago, the percentage of the general fund budget in every single jurisdiction, which is tiny, at the biggest it ever was for any jurisdiction was the city of Santa Cruz at 1% 15 years ago. So every jurisdiction is putting 1% towards this maximum. That percentage of the budget has declined pretty much every year for the last 15 years. And so although the amount of money might go up, its priority as a share of budget. So ask the right questions. Do you know, as you ask your city council, ask your city manager, ask your supervisor, what percentage of next year's budget is going to nonprofit community programs? How does that compare to pre-COVID percentage budget? Because if it's a smaller percentage, then this is how math works. That is a cut. Why are you cutting these programs? Because it's like, but it's more money than last year, but inflation is a real thing. It's not in our heads. It's a real thing.
Mike, you had a question, I think one or two more.
All right, just 2 quick comments. First, I was a city council member during the earlier period when we made the first expansion of social service funding. And we used to encourage groups to be advocacy groups and bring their clients to the meetings, and they used to take, 2 days. after a while, people realized, well, at that point, the city council was very progressive on these social service funding issues. So you don't, oh, why do we go through this exercise of bringing all these people and taking all this time? We're gonna give the money. Why don't you just bring your executive director and one client as an example? That was a devil's bargain, because it maybe for a short period of years that was true. But what happened is it really does take, there's all kinds of pressures on city council or board of supervisors. And you need to just ignore. You have an absolute right in a public hearing, force them to close off a public hearing when they've got 500 people or 300, literally 300 people in the room who need those services. Now, I teach at the university classes where students work as students who do internships in the community. My only and most important point is you got to have advocacy work and not simply the services are critical.
Yeah.
But you got to have advocacy work because it will have exactly what's happened. It slips away when people don't put the pressure on it. So the idea that you're going to, and they say you can only bring this executive director and one client or whatever the current model is not acceptable. And before you come to the hearings, you need again advocacy. You need individual council members, supervisors, and explain. I want to have a day set aside for our testimony. We need to hear from these people, and that will change the dynamic where they'll feel like they do have to increase the percentage, not decrease it. That's point one. Point two, taking nothing away from how absolutely critically important services that the groups provide in the short term without adequate resources. That has to happen. You do it. You do the best you can under those circumstances. This is responsive to what I think Karen had said earlier about how well. The choice is sort of like if you're going to serve more for power, then maybe capital is going to take, get a hit, or people that are better off. We don't need to make that choice in this society. One simple action, and this is a call for like action on bigger economic pictures that Democrats need to be playing a role with. A split tax rule in California, where the reverse Prop 13, not on individual residential properties, which often do have trouble making tax payments, but on corporate and commercial properties, industrial properties in California, which are over half of the properties in the state. We need to revert to taxes going up to real value of what that land is actually worth and taxing people with those property taxes. We tried that. We lost on we outspent 10-1. We lost 2-1 the last time that was on the ballot. We cannot give that fight up because you shouldn't have to. You're going to be more successful politically if you don't tell somebody in Capitol or Santa Cruz, we're going to take something away from you because we're going to provide something more for the people that equity demands it. Instead, both groups can get them funding that they need. We have the wealth in the society.
That's right.
To provide this. And the same thing at the federal level. The tax rate when President Eisenhower was president was 90% on the top 500 corporations. Today, 14%. Biden's moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
And trying to raise that back up. But it's even what he's doing is trivial in terms of what needs to happen. So that's a big political fight that it's not the day-to-day struggle that all of you are involved in trying to give somebody a sandwich when they're starving or they've got to have a place to stay out of the rain overnight. But it is the background for how we really need to tackle this problem.
Thanks,
Tax
Mike.
policy and monetary policy, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, for example, tax. If I were fortunate enough to own a private plane, the fuel I buy for my private jet is tax deductible. But did any of you get a tax break on the gas you need to go to work every day? No, you didn't. If you look at tax equity in the state of California, the last time I looked, $4 billion. If they just closed all the loopholes that benefited only people who made more than $2 million a year, there would be a $4 billion annual shift addition to the California budget. There's more than enough money.
Thank you. Lynn and Ray, is there any last minute thought you have to share with everybody? If not.
No, I just think that this has been an incredible discussion that we should do more often. I totally agree with Seal in terms of there's other people that probably like to hear kind of the boots on the ground experience. But with that, I mean, also what Mike's talking about, you do have these generational shifts happening now with either retiring CEOs or even people within the legislative and at the local level. city councils and stuff like that. So it's been fascinating for me to listen to this because I've been party to all those different parts of the puzzle piece. And it really does matter. So thank you to the Women's Democratic Club for putting this together for us, have this opportunity to share with the community and amongst ourselves, because this has really been valuable
Well,
information.
and thank you, just so you know, we're going to, this has been recorded and we'll get it out to more than just our membership, so more people will hear. Ray, any last minute or?
I mean, a third of the legislators shifted over this year, so we need to re-educate California again in terms of legislation and policy. We're gonna see some more shifts, obviously, we have board of supervisor shifts, but we're potentially gonna see 2 more. So it's an opportunity for us to continue to engage with local electeds on these issues, and I think that more education and conversation and also hold accountability to the values and decisions is critically important. I think that we like to see ourselves as very progressive, but latest policies in our community, share otherwise. I think it's really based on a policy-based decision-making of where values of our community really lie. So watch out for those decisions and, vote accordingly and have conversations after people might disappoint you.
Right on, as we used to say.
So,
Applause. Thank you.